Chapter 11. As the Daemonette walked towards its prey, Taldir, desperate to find Livy's weapon, while her head was fighting a battle against the sea of chaos that battered away at her mind, she barely registered the violent spamming of the Monkai. Doesn't it make you swim with ecstasy, knowing your plaything will eat out of the palm of your hand with a single thought? At this point, Taldir was doing all that she could to not burst into either tears or anger by the sheer mockery of this thing, tempting her like some sort of child or animal. That's when she felt a sharp pain on her back, immediately stopping her, as if a piece of the house fell on her. No, it was the house itself that was holding her in place. Panic began to swell within Taldir as she felt wooden claws digging into her wraithbone and skin. "Well, even if you aren't into it, I'm certainly excited," cried the cackling demon. She struggled with all the little energy she had, but it was no use. The Daemonite turned around to look Taldir in the eyes. There was a look of cynical mischief plastered on its face, like the face was stolen from another and pinned it to itself. Out of the corner of Taldir's eye, she saw Livy had stopped spasming. He was breathing shallow, slow breaths like he was dreaming, or consumed in a nightmare. Taldir knew the demon would consume their souls, and soon, if something wasn't done. She felt the house increase its pressure on her back. Try as you might, I can smell your fear. I can see your soul, how it burns with anguish and despair. I fear nothing, you disease of Ulthwain! Now Taldir was hearing demented howling, high-pitched screams of terror, and the unforgettable stench of warp-tainted flesh burning. Taldir could feel hot streams of tears rolling down her cheeks as she witnessed the hellishness unfold before her mind. The screams, though incoherent in the beginning, began to shout at her. "Traitor! Save us! Monkai sympathizer!" Truly, this was the hell that was awaited her, when she felt a pain in her cranium that burnt as if the very same energy of the warp was trying to invade her mind. "I promise you, this human won't be spared the same fate." Now, tears rolled down Taldir's cheek, being formed from the pain. "I will corrupt every single fiber of his being until nothing remains. And you'll have the privilege of watching me work." "No, please," Taldir pleaded. Everything was distorted, twisted, violated. Taldir could see the twitching fingers of Livy. She was scared. Scared in some warp-tainted house, and scared that she would die only to be fed to she who thirsts. And she was scared that she may not live long enough to save the soul of the one human who would risk their lives for her. She was scared of losing the one person on this Ulthwain-forsaken rock that she loved. That's when the Daemonette turned around on Livy to watch Taldir attempt to claw herself out of the wooden confine, to watch this Eldar slowly lose control of her emotions and break both spiritually and emotionally was its own satisfaction for the Daemonette. This, however, created a shift of powers, mostly focused on Taldir's suffering. This left Livy in a position to waken from his comatose state, and for him to tackle the daemon from behind. With all of his strength, Livy worked ferociously to beat the demon not only into submission, but to beat the everlasting emperor into the abomination's would-be soul. It was easier said than done. The daemon, at the height of its power, was stronger than it appeared. And while they both fell to the floor, Livy wasn't expecting a human-sized demon to give a space marine kick. It sent Livy flying into and through the wall. Upon impact, it occurred to Livy that Taldir was in confine of woods that used to be the floor was curved inward on her back, like a rib cage, and his gun just a few meters away from her. "How? How can you resist my influence?" howled the demon, moving towards him with a hip-swaying gait. "You defy my will, you corpse-loving was all it could spout out before Livy threw himself straight forward again, fist extended outward and into the hellish being's face. He then followed up with a kick to its warped mimic knee, that gave away with a satisfying snap and crunch. Before he could continue his onslaught of beatings, the abomination lashed out a punch to his abdomen and howled in rage. Though it couldn't stand, it could still influence the house to its bidding. Pipes shot upwards from the floor and nearly impaled Livy, but did bruise him severely on the back of his head. Fighting through both a wall of pipes and a slight concussion, Livy managed to somehow wrestle part of the piping free and use it to fight off the other possessed items. During all the insanity unfolding in front of Taldir, the wood flooring barely began to relax their hold on her, while the demon focused itself on Livy. Taldir focused on crawling towards the gun, with every fiber of her being. Even though the wood was no longer digging its way into her, it still hung on to her. It wasn't until the steel piping from below burst forth did the floor's grasp on her slacken. Inch by inch, millimeter by cursed millimeter, did she grasp the gun into her hand. Taldir stood herself up, and leaning against the wall, aimed the rifle at the living embodiment of her people's sins. Peering through the scope, she found her mark, steadied her aim, put the trigger on her finger, and nothing. The trigger is stiff, and wouldn't budge against her finger's desperate troll. It must be jammed, or on safety, she thought. Taldir began fidgeting with the rifle, trying to fix whatever the problem was. "Don't think I'm not aware of you, Taldir," the demon had said, each word dripping with malice and filled with loathsome venom. With renewed vigor, Taldir found the small, finger-sized lever. She flipped it and prayed to any of the gods listening. She exhales and bears the rifle on the demon. Pulling the trigger, the whole room is shaken by the sound of the exitus. The round found its mark on the demonette's shoulder, and out and through the wall behind. Taldir fired again. This time the bullet hit the left hip. Firing a third time, only this was stopped by a wall of piping 6 inches thick. Taldir pulled the trigger in rapid succession, an attempt to fire a bullet into the atrocity. The gun clicked with each pull of the trigger as it ceased to burst another shot. The demon was laughing, like it was the child being tricked, despite the fact its arm lay still on the ground, withered away with chaos sorcery. "How desperate! I haven't had a good laugh since I invoked the wrath of a loyalist dreadnought." Taldir hated this thing mocking her. She hated how it persisted, and worst of all, she hated how the damned thing's inability to just die. That's when the pipes reformed into a hole large enough for Taldir to see the demonette kneeling on its good leg, while the busted one slowly fixed itself. The demonette stared at Taldir and grinned, its blood-stained grin. It began to open its mouth as if to speak, only to be cut off by Libby's pipe brought down on the top of the skull, again and again. Soon matter of warp-tainted brains and daemon blood began to splatter in unfashionable spray. The house laid still, silent except for the beating of a long-dead being. Before Livy could sate his anger, the body began to return to the materium where it belonged, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Taldir and Livy collapsed onto what remained of the floor to let sleep whisk them away. Taldir and Livy awoke in the ruins of a house in the middle of the swamp, the sun climbing over the far mountains, bringing light to wash over the land. The house showed its true age while bathed in the pinkish-orange sunlight. The walls were decrepit at best, mold-lined ponds that formed from rust piping. Wood creaked from just the weight of either one person moving around. The roof fell into the ceiling, and it sagged incredibly so. While unsaid, it was decided to leave the house as soon as possible. The air was humid and sickly moist. It clung to skin that exuded sweat in the heat. The bugs were unbearable, constantly biting and swarming around. But the worst was the dehydration, the dryness of the mouth, and scratching throats, desperate for water, left them both feeling lightheaded. They would take small swigs from what little water was left from the house, only aggravating their mouths for more. Livy would once in a while look at his mapping chart to guide him in Taldir. "River's close," exhaled Livy, while he wrestled the map away and keeping the Exodus secure on his back. Taldir didn't say a word. She was thinking over on the Daemonette, and how it claimed she didn't care for Livy. Surely it was just the demon trying to cause mischief and lower Taldir's guard, right? No matter how hard she tried to reassure herself, the pit of uncertainty continued to nag at the back of her mind. She was so wrapped in her thoughts that it took Livy placing his hand on her shoulder and a gentle shaking to bring her back to reality. "You all right?" His mask was off, held under his arm now, and his piercing eyes stared into hers as she turned to look at him, dazed but alive. Taldir wasn't sure what to do other than nod, and continue to the river. When they finally did reach the river, both Taldir and Livy could barely contain themselves to eagerly quench their thirst and clean their gear. Livy got onto his knees and threw water onto his face, then drowned his head down into the river, drinking as much as he could. When Livy came back up for a breath of air, he could make out a silhouette on the opposite side of the river. Though quick to draw out his rifle and aim, the target moved back in the dense forest. "Enemies. Probably more than one," he thought. Reluctantly he put away his rifle, but never taking his eyes off of the last place he saw the shaded figure. Then the foliage began to tremble. "Unidentified target, 80 meters across," whispered Livy. Taldir, who was busy washing the sweat and blood from her wraithbone chestpiece, looked up to see what Livy was seeing. She could already see that there was more than one. They were being followed. Behind them, Taldir sensed movement. The waves were stirring. Livy could barely make out the distinct figures of the creatures across the river. They were small, quick, and armed, as seen from the glint of metal that passed now and again between the brush. Taldir could hear the ones from behind whispering. It almost sounded like that of a similar tongue the Monkai spoke, but more aggressive and disoriented. Greenskins. First the Gretchens, then the Choppa boys burst from the jungle in front of them, charging Taldir and Livy in a sudden wave of metal weapons, war-hungry faces, and rough, dark skin. That is the end of Chapter 11, and the end of, basically, what was written on 4chan. Chapter 11 was actually written by a netherite fag, who showed up at February 2nd, 2016, and basically wrote the end, because it ended at that other spot. I guess he wanted to continue writing. As it said, there's new write space, unedited content that's slowly being formed. Hasn't come out yet, but there's a transcription of 5 chapters, 2 other sections of content, including unfinished Lefkin Plume set after the final chapter of the original, blah, blah, blah. But it's all starting to form, hasn't been put out on the internet yet. 4chan also does have, or ID 4chan does have a little about the ending. This is just one old fag's recollection, but I figure it's better than nothing. The ending exists, or it did, for about half a day. It was posted in an obscure way. I want to say a troll-ridden Love Can Bloom discussion thread that was nearing autosage. No one saved it, apparently. This is all secondhand, mind you, but it fits my impression of the Bloom writer. He'd always struck me as very shy and self-effacing, possibly to the point of having genuine self-esteem issues. I also recall that he was struggling to keep going. The final chapter may not have been very good, or actually even reach the end. Or maybe the dude just had crappy net connection. It's way too easy to read into all these things. Either way, the Anon, who did see it, gave us the gist of it a day later, and the plot points he passed on are worth sharing. The Inquisitor was heretical, and had been making knockoff assassins, including Livy, whose defects were limited things like the Lovekin blooming. He could snipe as well as the genuine article. Livy managed to cover Taldir's escape, what was then captured as a consequence. Taldir makes it back to her ship, but winds up joining some rogue traders rather than returning to the craft world. The implication is that she intends to find and rescue Livy. So if you ever hear people talking about Space Pirate Taldir, just remember, according to the Lovekin Bloom, that's canon. That being said, there is no way to prove that any of the above is actually true. In the absence of any of the undeniable evidence to the contrary, the vast majority of TG acts on the assumption that Taldir and Livy escaped back to Ulthwé, where they eventually have a daughter. There's tons of art about that daughter. There's also a Lovekin Bloom EPUB. That's only chapters 1 through 10, missing the 9. There's also a bunch of, promotions or lewd content involving them as well. As basically, and then, of course, we now have, with the new Dawn of War 3, the actual fate of Taldir, which she ends up actually dying in Dawn of War. I keep trying to call it various different names. Basically, she dies at the end of Dawn of War, but then comes back in Dawn of War 3, has a Wraith Titan. Basically, her Soul Stone was saved and put into a massive walking construct. That is GW canon. So, you can even fit that in, if you really want to, into Lovekin Bloom, where Lovekin Bloom happened, but at the end she ended up dying and being put into a Wraith Titan. What happened to Livy? Did he get captured? Did L11VI, or LIIVI, Livy, as shortened, did he get captured and then die, or is he still out there trying to follow Taldir? It's all a bit of mix and bloom, and it's really fun to think about. But this was Lovekin Bloom. Right now I'm debating between a fan fiction that was sent to me by a friend, or going on with The Cistern Guardsman. If any of you have any idea what other one you'd like for me to read, go ahead and post it down in the comments. Also, word to the wise, soon my channel will be closing and merging with Hitchcock Handyman for a time. I'll be doing animated fan fiction, so not just will I be reading it, but I'll be drawing little short excerpts and fitting them in, so it'll be semi-animated, because I'm not a great animator, but it'll be semi-animated. And those will end up being on Hitchcock Handyman. And then I'm debating about still releasing the raws here, basically just me looking at the camera and reading. If you guys have any ideas on that, go ahead and comment down below as well. I'm not so sure if I'm going to continue on with recording games, just because I've been having a lot of problems with that, involving games crashing, the recording software not always wanting to go with the game, having various other minor issues, recording hours and hours of gameplay, and then noticing that that a couple of them are messed up, so you're missing a whole bunch of little points of it. As well as me playing by myself, I kind of think is boring, and right now I haven't been able to do a lot of multiplayer games, which are my favorite. I love the games that Dylan and I did. Sadly, we had problems again recording those, so I don't think any of them were saved. But anyways, if you guys have any ideas of things you want me to do, go ahead and comment down, now that I've fixed a little bit more of my microphone issues. But in other words, finding out how to use the dang phantom noise device, phantom power device thing. Go ahead and comment down there as well. Anyways, this is a lengthy ending, and that's basically just because I'm kind of sad Lovekin Bloom was only 10 chapters. It was fun. I loved it. It was great. And like I said, you guys have any ideas on what ones I can now do, go ahead and comment them below. And then when I start the next one, I'll be posting probably the raws here and the animated adventures over on that, as well as any more of my forge work, or me working out in the forge, doing a lot of crafts, will be posted on Hitchcock Handyman. And because you know, it's the Handyman. It's my brother's channel, but because he's the one providing internet for me right now, I figure it's only fair if I help give him content like we used to do. Thank you very much for watching my channel. I'll still probably be posting the RAWs here, and the animated's there, so the RAWs might appear first. But anyways, go ahead and check Hitchcock Handyman. Give it a look. My brother and my sister-in-law also read on that channel, although they do mostly Harry Dresden, children's books, and things like that, while I'm trying to stick to fan fictions, just because I feel like their author's just as good as the published work, and they deserve to have a little bit of acknowledgement, as well as I find a lot of fan fictions really fun. Anyways, this has been Joseph Hitchcock. Thank you so much for listening. You guys have yourself a wonderful day. Thank you, and signing off. Maybe.